The city of Chicago runs on whispers, but whispers can get you killed. Lina Hoffmann knew this the second she found the missing $3 million buried deep within the encrypted ledger of a notorious shell company. She thought her oversized, faded charcoal grey hoodie made her invisible, a soft, full-figured woman hiding her undeniable brilliance and her breathtaking, lush curves from a ruthless, judgmental world that only saw her weight. But she wasn't invisible to Marco Bellandi. When the city's most feared, aristocratic syndicate boss finally cornered her in the rain-slicked shadows of her office, he didn't see a terrified, frumpy accountant. He saw a queen. He saw the only woman smart enough to save his empire. And when his hands eventually bypassed the heavy cotton to find the soft curve of her waist, the world stopped turning. The neon sign of Kessler & Sons Financial flickered incessantly outside the third-floor window, casting a sickly, pulsing red glow over Lina Hoffmann's cramped desk. It was 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday, and a late autumn storm was lashing against the thin glass with the ferocity of 1,000 angry ghosts. The wind howled through the narrow alleys of the loop, but inside, the only sound was the frantic clicking of Lina's mechanical keyboard. Lina sat hunched over her glowing dual monitors, her dark eyes darting between endless columns of complex, alphanumeric codes. She was entirely engulfed in a massive, charcoal grey men's hoodie, a garment at least 3 sizes too big. It swallowed her completely, draping over her hips and thighs like a protective tent, deliberately hiding the lush, thick curves, full chest, and soft, beautiful lines of her body. For years, that heavy cotton hoodie had been her armor. Society, her peers, and a string of cruel ex-boyfriends had always told her that her body, heavy, wide-hipped, and unapologetically soft, was something to be minimized, something to be ashamed of. So she hid it. She let her brilliant, razor-sharp mind do the talking, burying herself in the solitary world of forensic accounting, where numbers didn't care about dress sizes, societal beauty standards, or the way her thighs touched when she walked. Numbers were pure. Numbers were safe. But tonight, the numbers were screaming at her. "This doesn't make sense," Lina muttered to the empty, dimly lit room, pushing her heavy black glasses up the bridge of her nose. She reached for her mug of coffee, grimacing as she tasted the cold, bitter liquid. But her eyes never left the screen. She had been tasked with auditing the accounts of Southside Logistics, a known shell company that managed shipping routes across the Midwest. Everyone in Chicago with half a brain knew who really owned Southside: Marco Bellandi. The Bellandi family had ruled the city's underground for 3 generations, their hands dipped in everything from racketeering to underground casinos. Marco, the current boss who had taken over after his father's sudden death, was a phantom, a man of violent reputation, unmatched ruthlessness, but possessing an unsettling, calculating intellect. Yet, as Lina traced the seemingly innocuous routing numbers through a labyrinth of dummy corporations, she found a bleeding artery. It was brilliantly hidden, disguised as fractional maintenance fees and phantom payrolls. But her mind saw the pattern. $3 million hadn't gone into Bellandi's offshore accounts. It had been siphoned, fraction by painful fraction, into an encrypted ghost account in the Cayman Islands. Someone within the organization was bleeding the family dry. Someone was stealing from the devil himself. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She was just a mid-level auditor. If she reported this to her boss, Mr. Kessler, he would likely bury it, terrified of retaliation. If she deleted it, the missing funds might eventually be pinned on her firm's incompetence. Before she could press the save key to secure the encrypted backup, the heavy oak double doors of the office shattered inward with explosive force. The sound of splintering wood and groaning metal echoed like a gunshot through the silent floor. Lina gasped, pushing her rolling chair back so violently it slammed against the filing cabinet. 4 men stepped into the dim light, their tailored, expensive suits dripping with cold rain. They moved with the silent, synchronized lethality of apex predators. But it was the man who walked in last that made the breath freeze entirely in Lina's lungs. Marco Bellandi. He was significantly taller than the street rumors suggested, built like a fortress of muscle beneath perfectly tailored midnight blue wool. His face was sharp, violently handsome, and fiercely aristocratic, but marred by a thin, jagged, silver scar that ran along his hard jawline, a permanent testament to the brutal, unforgiving world he commanded. His hair was damp and swept back, and his dark, fathomless eyes immediately bypassed the shattered door, the empty cubicles, and locked directly onto her. He didn't look at the glowing monitors displaying his ruined ledgers. He looked at the trembling woman swimming in a cheap, wet-weather grey hoodie. Lina Hoffmann. Marco's voice was a low, resonant rumble, richer and darker than the thunder outside. It vibrated in her chest. You have exactly 30 seconds to explain why my proprietary security systems triggered a Level 1 alert that an auditor from a third-rate financial firm is deep inside my personal, highly classified ledgers. Lina swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry as ash, the instinct to curl into a ball, to pull the oversized hood over her head, pull the drawstrings tight, and disappear from this terrifying man's gaze was overwhelming. She gripped the edges of her sleeves, pulling them down over her knuckles. But then she looked past him, glancing at the screen. She looked at the raw data. She looked at the undeniable truth. And the truth, as it always did, made her braver than she had any right to be. "I'm not stealing from you, Mr. Bellandi," she said, her voice shaking only slightly, forcing herself to hold his terrifying gaze. She stood up slowly, the massive hoodie falling past her thick thighs, masking her trembling legs. "But someone else is. And if you let your men kill me tonight, you'll never find out who." Silence stretched across the ruined office, thick, heavy, and suffocating. The only sound was the rain beating relentlessly against the glass and the crunch of splintered wood beneath the expensive leather shoes of the intruders. Marco's right-hand man, a cruel-eyed, silver-haired enforcer named Vittorio Rossi, stepped forward. His face was twisted in a sneer of absolute disdain, his hand slipping smoothly inside his tailored jacket to rest on the grip of a concealed weapon. "Give me the word, boss," Vittorio growled, his voice like grinding stones. "She's seen too much. She breached the inner firewall. We dump her in the lake and wipe the servers. It's clean." Marco didn't even look at Vittorio. He raised a single, leather-gloved hand, a gesture so casual, yet so laced with absolute authority that it stalled the older enforcer instantly. Marco stepped closer to Lina's desk. The sheer, overwhelming physical presence of the man swallowed the remaining oxygen in the room. He smelled of rain, expensive cedarwood cologne, and something distinctly metallic, primal, and dangerous. He looked down at the trembling woman standing behind the particle board desk. He noticed everything. He noticed the way she immediately crossed her arms over her chest, the way her shoulders hunched forward, instinctually trying to fold herself into a smaller, less noticeable package. He noticed the smudge of blue pen ink on her left cheekbone, and the fiery, rebellious spark of absolute terror and raw defiance in her wide, dark eyes. "Show me," Marco commanded softly, the quietness of his tone far more terrifying than a shout. Lina's hands, trembling uncontrollably, hovered over the computer mouse. She clicked open the routed pathways, expanding the window and projecting the hidden, complex ledger onto the main 32-inch screen. "Here," she pointed, a slender, shaking finger tracing the descending red lines on the graph. "Look at the time stamps. They are operating in small, automated increments, never more than exactly $9,999 at a time to avoid federal banking flags. It's a sophisticated algorithmic script designed specifically to evade your internal audits. It routes through a dummy subsidiary in Malta, pauses for 24 hours to wash the digital signature, then bounces to an untraceable server in the Caymans." Marco leaned in closely, his broad shoulder brushing against the oversized, worn fabric of her sleeve. Lina gasped softly at the contact, a jolt of heat racing up her arm despite her fear. He felt the rigid tension radiating from her, like a tightly coiled wire ready to snap. He stared at the screen, his dark eyes analyzing the data with a speed that surprised her. "How long did it take you to find this anomaly?" Marco asked, his gaze shifting from the monitor to her face, dropping to her soft lips for a fraction of a second. 2 hours, Lina whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "I noticed a discrepancy in the quarterly tax filings. Your internal accounting guys, they missed it for 6 months, or they chose to ignore it." Vittorio scoffed loudly, stepping up behind Marco. "She's lying, Marco. This is a setup. She's trying to buy time for the feds. Let me handle this. We don't take advice from a glorified human calculator." Marco finally turned his head, leveling a stare at Vittorio that could have frozen a raging fire. "I didn't ask for your opinion, Vittorio. Step back." Marco turned back to Lina, refusing to break eye contact. He saw completely past the baggy, shapeless clothes. Where other men saw a woman trying to hide her size, Marco saw the sharp, blazing, unparalleled intelligence in her dark eyes. He saw a woman who was justifiably terrified for her life, yet anchored by an unshakable, stubborn core of dignity. She wasn't begging. She was presenting facts. "You're coming with us," Marco said abruptly, stepping back and buttoning his jacket. "What? No!" Lina stepped back abruptly, her hip hitting the sharp edge of her desk. Pain flared, but she ignored it. "I showed you the leak. I proved I'm not the thief. My job is done. I'll quit this firm tomorrow. I don't want any part of your world. Please!" "You breached my encrypted network, Miss Hoffmann," Marco said, his tone flat, leaving absolutely no room for debate or argument. "You possess knowledge that makes you a liability to whoever set this algorithm up. You are already in my world. If whoever is stealing this money finds out an external auditor has tracked their digital footprints, you won't live to see the sunrise. They will kill you in your bed." "I can't just leave my life," Lina protested, panic rising in her throat, choking her. "I have a cat. I have rent." Marco closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He loomed over her, a massive shadow of power and impending violence, yet surprisingly, he kept his hands firmly at his sides. He didn't touch her. "You have a brilliant, beautiful mind, Lina," Marco said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper meant only for her. "Don't waste it being foolish. You are a target now. If you stay here, you die. With me, you live. Grab your laptop." Reluctantly, tears of frustration burning the corners of her eyes, Lina yanked the cords from her machine and shoved her heavy laptop into her worn canvas messenger bag. As she walked past the grim-faced enforcers, pulling her hood up high over her thick, dark hair to shield her face, she felt Marco's heavy, calculating gaze burning into her back. It wasn't a look of dismissal. For the first time in her adult life, even wrapped in her armor, Lina didn't feel like she was successfully hiding at all. The Bellandi estate was a sprawling, Gothic-style fortress, hidden behind 20-foot-high, ivy-choked wrought-iron gates on the desolate, wealthy edge of Lake Michigan. The drive there had been executed in complete silence, the tires of the armored SUV hissing over the wet asphalt. Upon arrival, Lina was ushered by silent guards into the West Wing and shown to a guest suite that was objectively larger and far more luxurious than her entire Chicago apartment. It was a gilded cage, draped in heavy emerald silk, rich mahogany, and plush velvet, but a cage nonetheless. The door locked from the outside with a heavy, definitive click. For 3 agonizing days, Lina lived in a state of high alert captivity. She paced the length of the Persian rugs until her feet ached. She was provided with everything she could possibly need: catered gourmet meals left on a cart outside her door, a bathroom stocked with expensive French soaps, and a closet filled with designer clothes in her exact size, which unsettled her deeply. Someone had paid very close attention to her dimensions. Despite the luxury, she adamantly refused to touch the designer dresses or tailored slacks. She refused to change out of her oversized grey hoodie and soft, worn black leggings. She showered, washed her clothes in the sink, and put them right back on. The baggy clothing was her final boundary, a physical and psychological barrier against an overwhelming, terrifying environment that sought to strip her of her agency and control. On the 4th night, the storm returned, thunder rattling the reinforced windows. The heavy door unlocked and opened. Marco walked in. He looked utterly exhausted. The sharp, aristocratic lines of his face were drawn tight with unimaginable stress, and the faint shadow of a beard darkened his jaw. He had stripped off his suit jacket and tie, the top buttons of his crisp white shirt undone, revealing a glimpse of a dark, intricate tattoo on his chest. He carried a heavy stack of encrypted, solid-state hard drives, dropping them onto the massive mahogany dining table in the corner of the suite with a loud clatter. "My accountants are useless," Marco declared, walking over to a crystal decanter on a side table and pouring himself 3 fingers of an amber liquid. "They're too terrified of displeasing me to tell me the hard truth, and too incompetent to find the rot." He offered the glass to her, but she shook her head, pulling her knees up to her chest on the velvet sofa. Marco downed half the glass, wincing slightly as the liquor burned. "I need you to trace the rest of the missing funds. I need the origin point, and I need the destination." Lina slowly uncurled her legs and approached the table cautiously, keeping the heavy dining chairs between them. "Why should I help you? You kidnapped me. You're a criminal, Mr. Bellandi. A murderer, if the news is to be believed." Marco stopped, his glass hovering halfway to his lips. He didn't erupt in anger. Instead, he looked at her with a profound, weary sadness, his eyes stripping away the Mafia boss pretense. "I am a man who inherited a deeply poisoned empire, Lina," Marco said, his voice quiet, devoid of its usual booming authority. "When my father died 5 years ago, he left me a syndicate drowning in blood, drugs, and human misery. For 5 years, I have been systematically, painfully dismantling the drug rings and weapons trades he built. I am bleeding this family dry to move us into legitimate real estate, shipping, and logistics. It is a war of attrition." He set the glass down, leaning his hands on the table. "This missing $3 million? It wasn't dirty money. It was clean capital earmarked for a union pension fund I was securing to guarantee our legitimate logistics contracts and wipe our slate clean with the state. Whoever stole it isn't just robbing my bank account. They are deliberately sabotaging my transition. They are trying to drag my family and this city back into the mud and the blood." Lina paused, her fingers lingering on the edge of the table. She had read the Financial Times. She had seen the rumors of the Bellandi family going soft, the violent shifts in the underworld power dynamics as rival families tried to test the new, seemingly weaker boss. Could this terrifying monster of a man actually be trying to find genuine redemption? "If I do this," Lina said, her voice steadying, finding her negotiator's edge. "If I find your ghost, I want my absolute freedom. No minders, no threats. And I want an ironclad guarantee that I won't be harmed by you or anyone in your organization." "You have my word," Marco said, his gaze locking with hers, searing with sincerity. "The word of a Bellandi. My word is the only thing in this world I truly own." Lina exhaled a long breath, pulled up a heavy wooden chair, and opened her laptop. Marco pulled up a chair directly beside her, the heat of his large body radiating against her side. For hours they worked in intense, focused silence, broken only by the rapid, rhythmic clicking of keys and the occasional rumble of thunder. Lina's mind, when given a puzzle, was a beautiful, terrifying machine. She sliced through firewalls, bypassed encryption protocols, and unspooled the tangled financial webs with a grace that left Marco mesmerized. He found himself captivated, not just by her incredible processing speed, but by her sheer presence. She was entirely unpretentious, devoid of the manipulative charm the women in his world usually employed. Every so often, as the hours ticked by, she would reach up to adjust the heavy fabric of her hoodie, pulling it over her chest, tugging the hem down over her thighs, as if constantly reminding herself to stay hidden in her fortress. "Why do you wear that?" Marco asked suddenly, around 3 a.m., the question slipping out into the quiet room before his disciplined mind could stop it. Lina froze. Her fingers hovered rigidly over the keyboard. She didn't look at him. "It's comfortable," she lied defensively, her voice tight. "It's a tent," Marco countered, his voice softening, devoid of mockery, but filled with genuine curiosity. "It's a shield. You're hiding. In your line of work, Mr. Bellandi, hiding is a necessary survival skill," Lina snapped, a defensive, embarrassed heat rising in her cheeks. She glared at the screen. "In mine, it's just easier. When I wear this, people don't look at me. They look at the work. They don't judge my size. They just judge my spreadsheets." Marco shifted in his chair, his gaze lingering on the soft, elegant line of her jaw, the flush of pink on her skin, the beautiful curve of her cheek. "They're fools, then. Blind, arrogant fools." Lina's heart gave a violent, traitorous thump against her ribs. She turned back to the screen, swallowing hard, but the air in the room had fundamentally shifted, thickening with an unspoken, heavy tension that had nothing to do with stolen money. Over the next week, the luxurious guest suite was completely transformed into a chaotic war room. Empty coffee cups, stacks of printed ledgers, and a massive rolling whiteboard covered the Persian rugs. Lina and Marco spent almost every waking hour together, meticulously mapping the sprawling financial web. The stark, terrifying lines between ruthless captor and helpless captive began to blur, slowly replaced by a strange, magnetic, and deeply intimate partnership. Marco didn't just command her, he listened to her. Truly, intently listened. In a corporate world where arrogant men constantly talked over her, ignored her insights, or dismissed her because she didn't fit the sleek, thin, corporate mold, Marco's silent, intense, respectful attention was incredibly intoxicating. He treated her brain like the most valuable weapon in his arsenal. Through her relentless digging, Lina discovered a horrifying truth. The money wasn't just being stolen to enrich someone's pocket. It was being weaponized. It was being used to secretly fund a highly militant, rival faction entirely from within the Bellandi family. Someone was aggressively buying the loyalty of street captains, purchasing black-market military-grade weapons, and actively preparing for a bloody citywide coup. "The offshore accounts," Lina explained late one evening, her voice hoarse. She stood by the whiteboard, tapping a black, dry erase marker against a circled node. They are all ultimately held under an umbrella holding company registered in Cyprus. It's called VR Enterprises. VR. It's remarkably sloppy. Not very creative at all. Marco, who was leaning against the edge of the mahogany table, froze. His face darkened instantly, a terrifying, violent shadow falling over his handsome features. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Vittorio Rossi," Marco whispered, the name tasting like ash. Lina gasped softly, lowering the marker. "Your underboss, the silver-haired man who was with you at my office, the one who wanted to kill me. He's been with my family since before I was born," Marco said, his voice laced with absolute, crushing betrayal. He gripped the edge of the thick wooden table so hard the wood groaned, his knuckles turning stark white. "He practically raised me after my mother died. But he vehemently disagreed with my move toward legitimacy. He thinks peace makes us weak. He thinks the families respect only terror." "He's not just stealing from you, Marco," Lina said, stepping closer to him, entirely forgetting her fear of him, using his first name naturally for the first time. "He's framing you. The routing numbers I traced. They have sophisticated digital backdoors that link directly back to your personal IP addresses at this estate. When this inevitably blows up, and the union discovers the pension fund is gone, the feds will trace it straight to you. They will think you embezzled the funds to fund a cartel. You'll go to federal prison for the rest of your life. The legitimate contracts will burn, and Vittorio will take over the syndicate as the savior." Marco looked at her. In her baggy, shapeless clothes, with her dark hair pulled into a messy, lopsided bun and a smear of black dry erase marker across her cheek, she looked exhausted. Yet, she had just flawlessly saved his life, his empire, and his family's future. He pushed off the table, stepping into her personal space. The distance between them evaporated. He reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he raised his hand, his large, rough thumb gently wiping the black marker from her soft cheek. The touch was electric. It sent a sudden, paralyzing jolt of liquid fire straight down Lina's spine. She shivered, her breath hitching. "You are incredible," Marco whispered, his voice thick with raw emotion and a deep, simmering hunger. "Absolutely incredible." Lina looked up into his dark, intense eyes, her breath catching in her throat. For a fleeting, beautiful second, she entirely forgot her deep-seated insecurities. She forgot the massive hoodie hiding her body. She just felt like a woman being truly seen by a man. But then, a harsh, frantic knock shattered the fragile moment. One of Marco's younger, fiercely loyal guards, a man named Leo, burst into the room without waiting for permission, his face pale, an assault rifle gripped tight in his hands. "Boss, we have a massive problem. Vittorio's men. They bypassed the gate security. He knows she's here, and he knows she's looking at the books. They just breached the outer perimeter. We are heavily outnumbered." In an instant, the serene quiet of the estate erupted into absolute chaos. Deafening automatic gunfire echoed from the front courtyard, the sound loud, jarring, and violently out of place against the quiet, opulent luxury of the mansion. The heavy thud of boots running across marble floors reverberated through the halls. "We need to move." "Now," Marco ordered, his demeanor shifting instantly. The vulnerable, betrayed man vanished, instantly replaced by the ruthless, calculating commander of a Mafia empire. He strode to the wall behind the desk, pressed a hidden panel, and a section of the bookshelf swung open to reveal a hidden, biometric safe. He punched his hand onto the scanner, grabbed a heavy, matte black handgun, checked the magazine with terrifying efficiency, and chambered a round. "Leo, secure the grand staircase. Hold them off as long as you can, then fall back to the woods. I'm taking her to the secondary safe house in the city." Lina was paralyzed, standing frozen by the whiteboard. The sound of bullets shattering the priceless stained glass windows down the hall sounded like exploding crystal. Marco crossed the room, grabbed her hand, his grip incredibly firm, possessive, but careful not to bruise her soft skin, and pulled her hard toward another concealed door hidden behind a heavy tapestry. "Stay behind me. Keep your head down, and do exactly what I say," Marco commanded, his eyes blazing. They plunged into the darkness. They rushed down a dark, narrow, spiraling stone staircase that smelled of damp earth, mildew, and old concrete. The terrifying noise of the firefight grew muffled, echoing faintly above them like a storm passing over a cave. Lina's heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. The oversized hoodie, once her comfort and shield, was now a heavy, restrictive liability, tangling around her legs as she scrambled down the uneven steps in the dark. They emerged at the bottom into a dimly lit, subterranean concrete garage beneath the estate. A sleek, heavily armored black SUV was waiting, the engine already warm. Marco practically shoved her into the passenger seat, slamming the heavy, reinforced door before sprinting around and sliding behind the wheel. He gunned the engine, the monstrous V8 roaring to life. He hit a button on the visor, and the heavy metal garage doors rolled up, revealing the stormy, rain-swept Chicago night. They shot out into the darkness just as two of Vittorio's black sedans swerved onto the access road. Rain lashed against the windshield in violent sheets. Marco drove with terrifying, cold precision, his face a mask of absolute concentration, as he wove the massive vehicle through the slick, empty streets leading toward the city. The tires screamed as they took corners at impossible speeds. Suddenly, a pair of blinding high-beam headlights flared in their rearview mirror. "Hold on!" Marco ground out, his jaw clenched tight. He wrenched the steering wheel violently to the left, sending the heavy SUV skidding around a tight, blind corner into an industrial alleyway. Sparks flew as the side mirror scraped against a brick wall. Gunfire suddenly peppered the back of the vehicle. The loud thwack, thwack, thwack of bullets striking metal and glass was deafening. The rear armored glass spider-webbed spectacularly, but held firm. Lina screamed, a raw sound of sheer terror, folding herself in half and violently ducking her head beneath her arms, trying to bury herself in the oversized hoodie. Marco, keeping one hand tight on the steering wheel, reached over the center console. He placed a strong, hot, fiercely reassuring hand directly on her trembling, thick thigh. The contact was shocking, grounding her instantly amidst the chaos. "Look at me," Marco shouted over the roar of the engine. When she peeked out, terrified, his eyes were burning with a terrifying promise. "I won't let them touch you. I swear to God, Lina, I will burn this city to the ground before I let them touch you." With a sudden, violent, and calculated maneuver, Marco slammed the brakes, throwing the SUV into a controlled spin. The pursuing car, unable to react in the slick rain, swerved frantically, lost control, and crashed violently head-on into a massive concrete barrier, the hood crumpling like tin foil in a burst of steam and sparks. Marco didn't stop to look at the wreckage. He straightened the wheel and accelerated hard into the labyrinth of the city, the adrenaline burning fiercely through them both. They drove evasively for another hour, making a dozen blind turns through the industrial district, finally arriving at a massive, abandoned, rusted warehouse on the desolate, southern edge of the shipping docks. Marco pulled the SUV inside a loading bay, hitting a remote to shut the heavy corrugated iron doors behind them, sealing them in absolute darkness. Marco cut the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, ringing and deafening. They were alive. But they were officially hunted. The safe house was a small, dusty, brutally utilitarian apartment built into the elevated loft of the vast warehouse. It was freezing cold, the bitter wind coming off the lake, howling relentlessly through the poorly sealed, cracked windows. During the frantic sprint from the SUV to the internal staircase of the building, they had been caught in a sudden, torrential downpour. Lina stood in the dead center of the dimly lit room, illuminated only by a single, bare, swinging bulb. She was shivering uncontrollably. Her massive, oversized grey hoodie was completely soaked through. The heavy cotton acted like a sponge, clinging to her skin, dragging her down with freezing, icy weight. Her teeth were chattering so hard her jaw ached. Marco walked in from checking the perimeter doors. He was soaked as well, his expensive dress shirt plastered wetly against his muscular chest, emphasizing the broad, powerful lines of his torso. But he didn't seem to notice or care about the cold. He looked immediately at Lina, watching her shiver violently, her lips turning a faint shade of blue. "You need to take that wet thing off," Marco said, his voice quiet but carrying the heavy weight of a command. He set his gun down on a rusted metal table. "You'll catch hypothermia if you stay in that wet cotton." Lina's dark eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated panic. Her arms immediately crossed aggressively over her chest, hands gripping her shoulders in that familiar, deeply ingrained protective gesture. No, I'm fine. I just need a blanket. I'll dry off." "Lina," Marco said, taking a slow step toward her, his tone dropping to a soothing yet firm register. "The fabric is literally freezing you. It's holding the ice against your skin. Take it off." "I said no," she yelled, her voice cracking, echoing loudly in the empty room. The immediate, visceral fear of Vittorio's bullets was suddenly, completely eclipsed by a much older, deeper, and far more debilitating terror. The absolute terror of being seen, of being judged, of exposing the soft belly, the thick, heavy thighs, the full, unapologetic curves she had spent years of her life trying to erase from the world's critical view. Marco stopped instantly. He didn't push. He looked closely at her and saw the genuine, raw, paralyzing panic swimming in her eyes. It broke his heart. He slowly held both his hands up in a gesture of absolute surrender, taking another very slow, deliberate step toward her. "What are you so intensely afraid of, Lina?" he asked softly, his voice a warm caress against the freezing air. Tears, hot and fast, mixed with the cold rainwater on her pale cheeks. "I know what I look like, Marco," she sobbed, the dam finally breaking. "I know I'm not the kind of woman men like you, powerful, handsome men, look at. I know I'm not the girl in the magazines. I'm not thin, I'm not toned, I'm not perfect. This..." She gripped the hem of the soaked, heavy hoodie, her knuckles white. "This ugly sweater is all I have to protect myself from the disgust in people's eyes." Marco's hard expression shattered, softening into something incredibly fierce, devastatingly tender, and fiercely protective. "You think I haven't noticed you?" he asked, his voice vibrating with suppressed emotion. "You think I haven't spent the last week agonizingly aware of every breath you take? You think I haven't seen the way you command an entire room with nothing but your brilliant mind? Do you honestly think this cheap, pathetic piece of wet cloth could ever hide how utterly beautiful you are?" Lina froze, her breath catching on a sob. "You're just saying that. You're trying to manage me." "I never lie," Marco whispered, stepping directly into her personal space, his imposing body radiating heat against the cold. "Take it off, Lina. Not for me. For you. Stop hiding from the world. You are too magnificent to hide." Slowly, agonizingly, with trembling hands that felt numb, Lina grasped the hem of the soaked, heavy grey hoodie. She squeezed her eyes tightly shut, took a deep, shuddering breath, and pulled it up over her head. The wet fabric dragged against her skin before she let it drop to the dusty wooden floor with a heavy, wet thud. She stood before him wearing nothing but a simple, damp, black camisole and her clinging black leggings. Stripped of her armor, she was lush. She was beautifully full-figured, with thick, powerful thighs, soft, rolling, feminine curves, a full waist, and a breathtaking, statuesque, classic beauty that rivaled Renaissance paintings. She kept her eyes firmly shut, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm, bracing herself for the inevitable rejection, waiting for the invisible wall of disgust to fall between them. Instead, she felt Marco's warm, incredibly gentle, rough hands cup her face. She opened her eyes slowly. Marco was looking at her body, yes, but not with disgust. He was looking at her with absolute, unfiltered, staggering reverence. His dark eyes dragged slowly, hotly over her curves, burning with a quiet, undeniable and deeply possessive fire. "Perfect," he breathed out, the single word vibrating in the quiet room, laced with absolute sincerity. "Fucking perfect." He slid his large hands down her neck, tracing the soft, full curve of her shoulders, his thumbs pressing into the soft flesh of her waist, before pulling her flush against his hard, muscular body. He looked deep into her dark eyes, stripping away years of trauma, cruelty, and deep-seated shame in a single, intensely validating gaze. "Now you're mine," he whispered fiercely, his breath hot against her lips. "And I protect what is mine." He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, hesitant kiss. It was desperate, consuming, and filled with a blazing, passionate heat that instantly chased away the bitter cold of the storm. For the first time in her life, Lina didn't shrink away or try to make herself smaller. She gasped into his mouth, kissing him back with equal desperation. She pressed her soft, heavy curves against his hard frame, finally, completely owning her space, her beautiful body, and her undeniable power. The next morning, the violent storm had finally passed, leaving a crisp, blindingly cold dawn in its wake. Sunlight fractured through the dirty, high windows of the warehouse loft. Lina sat at the small, rusted kitchen table, wrapped snugly in a warm, thick wool blanket Marco had found in a supply closet. Her laptop was open, the glowing screen the brightest thing in the dim room. She felt fundamentally different. The air in her lungs felt lighter. The oppressive, suffocating weight of her insecurities, the burden she had carried for over a decade, had been completely burned away by the consuming fire of the previous night. She wasn't just a terrified accountant anymore. She was a woman who deeply knew her worth, both intellectually and physically. Marco stood directly behind her, dressed in a black tactical shirt he had pulled from a duffel bag, a heavy, reassuring hand resting securely on her bare shoulder. He traced circles on her skin with his thumb. "Can you do it?" he asked, his voice low. "All business now. Vittorio thinks he's an entire step ahead of us because he controls the offshore routing and the firewall," Lina said, her fingers flying across the keys with deadly, confident precision. But he made a massive, arrogant mistake. To finalize the ultimate transfer of the stolen $3 million and the rest of his amassed cartel funds into his personal, untraceable war chest, he built a failsafe. He needs a dual authentication ping directly from the main Bellandi server at the estate. He thinks you're locked out, but I can spoof that ping. I can make the system think we are sitting in your study. "And if you do?" Marco asked, leaning in, his cheek brushing her hair. "I can reverse the entire flow," Lina smiled, a sharp, dangerous and incredibly sexy smile. I can drain every single one of his hidden accounts, rip the money out of his hands, and dump every single cent, along with the original stolen $3 million, directly into a federal FBI evidence lockbox, and I can stamp the entire data packet with his personal digital signature, his voice logs, and his home IP address. The FBI will wake up to a neat, bow-tied package proving conclusively that Vittorio Rossi has been money laundering, embezzling union funds, and running an illegal weapons cartel. You'll be entirely clean. But, Marco asked, hearing the hesitation in her voice. Lina paused, looking up over her shoulder at him. To push a data packet that large, I have to open a brief, highly visible, 2-minute window on the open network. When I do, Vittorio's tech guys will trace it instantly. They'll know our exact IP, they'll know we're at this specific warehouse on the docks. And they will come heavily armed. Marco's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing into predatory slits. He stepped back from the table, checking the chamber of his weapon with a sharp clack. Set the trap. Let the old man come. Marco, he has an army of mercenaries, Lina warned, turning in her chair, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. You're one man. I'm not fighting an army, Lina, Marco said, his voice cold, devoid of fear. I'm cutting off the head of the snake. We end this miserable civil war today. You give me those 2 minutes to ruin him financially, and I will give you your life back safely. Lina stared at him, implicitly trusting the man who had seen her soul. She nodded once. She turned back to the screen, took a deep breath, and slammed her finger onto the execute key. The green progress bar on the screen immediately began to fill. 10%! 30%! Suddenly, the screen flashed violently red. An alarm blared from the laptop speakers. Incoming trace detected. They have our location, Lina warned, her heart rate spiking, her fingers hovering over the abort key. They are pinging the local cell towers. Keep going. Do not stop, Marco said, calmly. He walked over and stood by the heavy iron door leading to the loft stairs. His posture was relaxed, but his muscles were coiled tight like a predator ready to strike. 60%. 80%. The distant sound of screeching tires echoed across the empty concrete docks outside. The aggressive roar of multiple heavy engines cut violently through the quiet morning silence. Brakes squealed, heavy doors slammed in unison. Voices began shouting harsh, tactical orders. 99%. 100%. Transfer complete, Lina said, slamming the laptop shut with a loud crack. It's done. Vittorio Rossi is officially bankrupt, and the FBI director just received a very loud, very anonymous tip on his private server. Good girl, Marco said softly, a dark smile playing on his lips. Now get exactly where I told you, under the floorboards. Do not come out until I call your name. Lina grabbed her laptop and scrambled toward the corner of the room, prying up the loose boards to slip into the hidden smuggler's compartment beneath the floor. She pulled the boards back into place, leaving the hatch cracked just a fraction of an inch to see. A second later, the massive warehouse doors downstairs were violently blown completely off their hinges by a shaped explosive charge. Thick dust and acrid grey smoke billowed up into the loft as Vittorio Rossi strode arrogantly up the metal stairs, flanked by a dozen heavily armed mercenaries in tactical gear. Vittorio looked incredibly triumphant, a cruel, victorious sneer twisting his aged, scarred face. He held a submachine gun casually by his side. "Marco!" Vittorio shouted, his raspy voice echoing loudly off the corrugated steel roof. "It's over. You always were too soft, boy. Your little fat accountant left a breadcrumb trail a mile wide. Step out of the shadows and die like a Mafia boss." Marco stepped out casually from behind a thick steel structural pillar. He looked utterly calm, almost bored. His hands hung loosely, empty at his sides. He didn't even have his gun raised. "You always were deeply impatient, Vittorio," Marco said, his voice projecting a lethal, chilling authority that made the mercenaries shift uncomfortably. "And remarkably greedy. The 3 million wasn't enough? You had to try and frame me for it? You had to try and destroy the family name?" "You're making us weak," Vittorio spat, pointing the barrel of his weapon directly at Marco's chest. "Pensions, real estate, corporate logistics. We are wolves, Marco. We take what we want. You want to turn this legendary family into a pack of neutered sheepdogs. The other families are laughing at us. The street captains won't stand for it. Today the Bellandi name gets its fangs back." Marco chuckled, a dark, chilling, humorless sound that sent a shiver down Lina's spine beneath the floorboards. "You think you have fangs, old man? You're toothless. Check your secure phone." Vittorio frowned, confusion breaking his arrogant facade. He gestured aggressively for his men to hold their fire. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his encrypted satellite phone. The screen was already glowing with multiple high-priority alerts. His eyes rapidly scanned the screen. The color drained instantly from Vittorio's face, leaving him a sickly, pale gray. His mouth opened and closed in silent shock. "What? What did you do?" Vittorio stammered, raw, unadulterated panic completely replacing his bravado. "While you were busy driving here to gloat and kill me, the accountant you dismissed was busy emptying your accounts," Marco explained coldly, taking a slow step forward. "Every single cent you stole from the Union, plus everything you've hoarded in your personal war chest for the last 20 years, was just wired directly to an FBI federal evidence account, along with a meticulously detailed, undeniable ledger of your personal drug trafficking operations and unauthorized weapons purchases." "You lying bastard! Kill him!" Vittorio screamed, his voice pitching high with hysteria, raising his gun. But before a single shot could be fired, sirens began to wail in the distance. Not just one or two. Dozens. The piercing, terrifyingly loud sound of heavily armored FBI tactical raid vans and Chicago police cruisers converging from all directions onto the docks completely shattered the morning air. Vittorio's mercenaries immediately looked at each other, lowering their weapons. They were hired guns, loyal only to the paycheck, and they had just heard, very clearly, that the man writing their checks had absolutely no money left, and the feds were 60 seconds away. "The federal tactical units will be coming through those doors in exactly 60 seconds, Marco announced to the room, his voice booming. "Vittorio is going down for grand embezzlement, federal racketeering, and treason against the commission. Anyone standing next to him when the feds' breach goes down with him for life. You want to die in prison for a broke, traitorous old man? Or do you want to drop your weapons and walk away right now?" The men hesitated for only a fraction of a second. Then a clatter of metal filled the room as, one by one, they dropped their expensive rifles to the floor. They turned and melted into the shadows of the warehouse, fleeing frantically out the back, loading exits toward the water before the police perimeter could close. Vittorio stood entirely alone in the center of the room, his hand shaking violently. He aimed his gun at Marco, tears of rage in his eyes. "You ruined me. I'll kill you myself." Before Vittorio's trembling finger could pull the trigger, Marco moved with terrifying, blinding speed. He closed the 10-foot distance in a heartbeat, disarming the older man with a brutal, bone-snapping strike to the wrist. Vittorio screamed, dropping the gun, and collapsed heavily to his knees, gasping in agonizing pain. Marco stood over him, picking up the dropped gun. He aimed it directly at Vittorio's forehead. For a dark, suspended moment, the old Marco, the ruthless, blood-soaked Mafia boss he was raised to be, wanted desperately to pull the trigger and end the threat forever. But then he looked toward the corner of the room, toward the floorboards, where he knew Lina was watching. He thought of her warmth. He thought of the legitimate empire they were going to build. He didn't want to be a monster anymore. He wanted to be a man fundamentally worthy of her brilliant light. He slowly lowered the gun, dropping it onto the floor, kicking it away. "The law can have you, Vittorio," Marco said, his voice laced with finality and disgust. "You aren't worth my soul anymore." The heavy stomp of boots echoed up the stairs. The FBI tactical units breached the loft a moment later, throwing Vittorio to the floor and snapping cuffs on him, while Marco calmly raised his hands, a satisfied smile on his face. 6 months later, the iconic Chicago skyline glittered like a bed of diamonds under a clear, crisp, starry night. The Bellandi Foundation for Urban Development was hosting its inaugural, highly publicized charity gala in the magnificent Grand Ballroom of the Drake Hotel. The violent, bloody criminal syndicate of the past was officially gone, meticulously dismantled piece by piece. Vittorio Rossi was rotting in a federal supermax prison, awaiting trial. In the syndicate's place stood a massive, entirely legitimate corporate empire of real estate, shipping, and union-backed logistics. A brilliantly cleaned slate bought with Lina's intelligence and Marco's moral courage. Marco Bellandi stood near the base of the sweeping marble grand staircase, holding a glass of champagne. He was dressed flawlessly in a sharp, custom-tailored midnight blue tuxedo. He was no longer the feared phantom of the violent underworld. He was a highly respected, albeit intimidating, titan of industry. Yet, as the city's elite swirled around him, his dark eyes were restlessly searching the crowded room, utterly indifferent to the politicians, mayors, and wealthy socialites aggressively clamoring for his attention. Then the music seemed to quiet. He looked up, and he saw her. Lina Hoffmann slowly descended the grand marble staircase, and the entire opulent room seemed to collectively hold its breath. She wasn't wearing a faded, oversized grey hoodie. She wasn't hiding. She wore a stunning, custom-made emerald green silk gown that boldly, beautifully hugged every single one of her magnificent thick curves. The rich fabric draped elegantly over her wide hips and cinched at her narrow waist, showcasing her lush, full figure with absolute, breathtaking, unapologetic pride. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant style, loose curls cascading over her bare, soft shoulders, and her head was held high. She was positively radiating power and confidence. She was a woman who had faced death, outsmarted a cartel, brought down a Mafia boss, and learned to fiercely, deeply love herself in the process. Marco immediately abandoned his conversation with a senator, moving purposefully through the parted crowd, physically unable to tear his eyes away from her. When he reached the bottom of the stairs, he offered his large hand. Lina took it gracefully, her soft, warm skin sending that familiar jolt of electricity straight to his heart. "Your late chief financial officer," Marco murmured, a devastating, genuinely happy smile playing on his lips as he pulled her into his space. "I had to make sure the Foundation's charity ledgers were absolutely perfect, Mr. Bellandi," Lina replied smoothly, her dark eyes sparkling with a mix of playful mischief and profound love. "And let's be honest, it takes a little extra time to look this incredibly good." Marco laughed, a rich, deep sound that turned heads. He pulled her flush against him, resting his large hand securely and possessively on the soft, flared curve of her waist, entirely uncaring of the flashing press cameras or the hundreds of watching eyes. "You have always looked incredibly perfect to me, Lina," Marco whispered, his voice vibrating with absolute truth. "From the very first moment I saw you trembling in that ridiculous tent of a sweater," Lina smiled, a bright, blinding expression of pure joy leaning her head against his broad shoulder. She had finally stopped hiding. She had boldly stepped out of the cold, lonely shadows and into the warm, brilliant light, completely and perfectly herself. And together they ruled a massive, beautiful new empire, one built not on blood and fear, but on undeniable truth, fierce resilience, and an unbreakable, passionate love. What a truly incredible, pulse-pounding journey for Lina and Marco. This story powerfully proves that true strength isn't about desperately trying to conform to society's incredibly narrow, toxic standards of beauty. It's about boldly owning your unique brilliance, shedding the heavy weight of your insecurities, and standing tall and unapologetic in your own skin. Lina's oversized hoodie was a protective shield against a cruel world. But when she finally dropped it, she didn't just reveal her magnificent physical beauty. She revealed her untamed, world-changing power. And Marco's beautiful redemption arc reminds us all that it is absolutely never too late to change your path, to rise above a poisoned legacy, and to choose legitimacy and true love over darkness. Together, their partnership dismantled a corrupt empire and built a lasting legacy of honor. If you loved this intense, action-packed romantic drama and want to see more long-form stories that challenge standard tropes and celebrate real, fierce, unapologetic characters, please hit that like button. Right now, share this video with your friends who love a good Mafia romance and subscribe to our channel for more cinematic, immersive audio dramas. We put a lot of work into these stories for you. Let us know in the comments below. What was your absolute favorite twist or romantic moment in the story? Did you expect Vittorio to be the traitor? See you in the next one.